Okay, so we've spent some time exploring the world of positive externalities, especially how they relate to innovation and the various ways governments can encourage that. Now we're going to shift our focus over to an important concept here, which are public goods. Public goods go hand in hand with positive externalities. They're taught in the same chapter, obviously. But this section is going to specifically define a public good and the unique challenges that they present in a market economy. And we'll talk about how these goods are typically provided. So at the end of this section, you should be able to identify a public good using non-excludable and non-rival criteria, explain the free rider problem, and identify several sources of public goods. So what exactly is a public good? In economics, a public good is defined by two key characteristics. The first is the non-excludability, which means that it is costly or even impossible to prevent people from using that good, even if they haven't paid for it. Think about national defense. Once it's provided for one citizen, it's practically impossible to include others from its protection. The second characteristic is non-rivalry, meaning that one person's use of the public good does not reduce its availability or usefulness to others. Again, national defense, one person being protected doesn't diminish the protection available to anybody else. It's important to note that positive externalities and public goods are very closely related. Public goods often generate significant positive externalities, which benefit society broadly. But not all goods with positive externalities are public goods. For instance, while education has positive externalities, it is generally excludable. You can be denied access to a private school. And it's rivalrous to some extent because a crowded classroom can limit the learning experience. If there's too many people in a room, you don't get that hands-on one-on-one. So the unique nature of public goods does lead to some core issues in their provision, most notably the free rider problem, which we discussed a little bit in the introduction, and then the broader challenges associated with managing shared resources, which is the problem we call the tragedy of the commons. We'll touch on both of these. So let's consider some examples of public goods just to solidify our understanding. National defense, which we've talked about, that's non-excludable, it's non-rivalrous. The protection it offers benefits everyone within a nation's borders without diminishing the availability to others. Public health programs, particularly those focused on sanitation and disease prevention, they have these same characteristics. For example, a citywide, mosquito spraying program benefits the entire community, and it would be difficult to exclude specific individuals from its effects. Similarly, one person benefiting from reduced disease risk doesn't reduce that benefit for others. Another category would be infrastructure, things like tornado sirens, streetlights, lighthouses. These provide widespread benefits that are generally non-rivalrous and non-excludable. Imagine a lighthouse that guides ships. Its signal helps all the vessels in the area, and one ship using its guidance doesn't prevent others from doing the same. Think about your interstate system. Yes, it can get crowded sometimes, and you may get into a road traffic, road log jam. But generally speaking, if you own a car and you're licensed to drive, you're free to go anywhere in the country using the interstate system. So now let's look at a central challenge associated with these public goods, which is the free rider problem. That's the first one we'll talk about. Free riders are individuals who want others to pay for the public good, and then they plan to use the good themselves without contributing. Because public goods are non-excludable, there's often very little incentive for individuals to voluntarily contribute to their provision. Why pay for something if you can benefit from it even if you don't pay? This creates a situation where if many people act as free riders, the public good may never be provided at all, or it might be provided in an insufficient quantity. So we can think of the free rider problem in terms of the prisoner's dilemma game that we talked about in our chapter on oligopolies, right? Where the individual rational strategy of not contributing leads to a collectively suboptimal outcome, the absence or the undersupply of the public good. If you've got two people and they both have the free rider mentality, they both choose not to cooperate, not to contribute, there are lesser benefits for all of society. So recognizing this challenge, the government often does step in to solve the free rider problem primarily through taxation. By collecting taxes from the population, the government can then fund the provision of essential public goods like the national defense or infrastructure. Laws and regulations can also be used to force someone to contribute, and occasionally public spending is strategically reduced to disincentivize free riding. For example, recent legislative efforts like the Senate Bill 841 that passed in 2024 in the state of West Virginia, that created a sliding pay scale for unemployment benefits. And that can be seen as a measure that gradually reduces benefits as a claimant finds a new job, potentially reducing the incentive to rely solely on unemployment compensation. So in other words, what that does is if you're on unemployment for a long time, prior to this bill, your benefits would have extended over quite a long time and they wouldn't have decreased. Now with this bill in action, your benefits are actually decreasing week after week after week. I think that's how it works anywhere. It's a sliding scale now where the longer it takes you to find a job, the less benefits you're going to get in exchange. So you better get busy finding a job. We're trying to eliminate the free riders who are just collecting a check and not putting in any work. So further illustrate this free rider problem, use the framework of the prisoner's dilemma here. Consider a simple scenario. Suppose two people, in this case Rachel and Samuel, they're considering purchasing a public good that benefits both of them equally. The difficulty arises because their decision of whether or not to contribute is influenced by what they expect the other person to do. Let's look at the payoff structure here. If both Rachel and Samuel contribute, which is the top left here, if they both contribute, then we would say that they would get a payoff of 3 each, hypothetically, right? We're just making up some numbers with this. If one person contributes and the other doesn't, the other one is a free rider because they don't contribute, then the public good is still provided, but the contributor bears more of the costs and doesn't get as much of the net benefits, right? The free rider enjoys the full benefit without the payoff. So they're getting a benefit of 4. And as opposed to a benefit of 1 for the contributor. If neither contributes, then the public good isn't even provided because they're not paying into the system at all, and then now there's not enough resources to even provide the public good. And so they both receive a payoff of nothing, of 0. So from Rachel's perspective, if Samuel contributes, she's better off not contributing because she's going to get a payoff of 4. And then on the same side, Samuel's thinking the same thing about Rachel. So this logic leads both of them to rationally choose not to contribute, resulting in the public good not being provided, even though both would have been better off if they collectively contributed. That's the essence of the free rider problem. It's a lot easier when you boil it down to, prisoner's dilemma of 2 people, but imagine this large scale over hundreds of millions of people. The key to addressing the free rider problem is ensuring the provision of public goods the key to addressing it and ensuring the provision of public goods is to find mechanisms that encourage everyone to make a contribution. Like we talked about, this is often done through taxation, where the government uses its authority to collect funds and then provides that public goods with those funds. Laws and public spending can be structured to occasionally reduce government benefits in ways that disincentivize free riding, like we saw with the sliding pay scale for unemployment benefits in West Virginia. However, not all solutions rely on government intervention. There are also social pressures and personal appeals that can play a significant role in reducing the number of free riders and encouraging people to contribute resources for the public good. Think about neighborhood associations that organize, beautification projects, or residents who patrol their area to deter crime. They call it Neighborhood Watch. These efforts often succeed because of a sense of community, responsibility, and the potential social costs of not participating. In some lower income countries, there are strong social norms that can compel collective action, like all farmers in a region who come together to work on a large irrigation project that benefits everybody. I like to think about how the Amish communities work. They all come together to build that barn, right? And if one person doesn't help with the work, you can better bet they're going to be ostracized a little bit, right? So even fundraising efforts for local charities or university endowments, all of that stuff relies on heavy social pressure and the appeal of contributing to a cause that benefits the wider community. That's not going to work on every single person in society, but that social pressure can definitely work. There's a psychology factor to that. Now, it's also important to recognize that the provision of public goods isn't always as straightforward as, the government funding it through taxes. There are other models of public goods that also exist in our economy. In some cases, the market can produce public goods through an indirect way of charging for them. Think about commercial radio, for example. Radio broadcasts are generally non-excludable and non-rivalrous. When you go into your car and you turn on the radio, it's not like you're paying a fee in order to access the radio station's broadcast symbols. It's just free radio, right? You just get music in your ears, and you have to hear people talking. And you can't turn it off for one person and only have it for some. So radio broadcasts are generally non-excludable and non-rivalrous. So while listeners don't directly pay, there is revenue generated through the selling of advertising. So in this model, it's the freemium model, in where advertisers are essentially paying for their listeners' attention, which allows the radio station to cover the costs of providing that public good of free broadcasts. Now, subscription services like satellite radio are more of a mixed model, where the cost of the service, the radio programming, has some non-rivalrous aspects because you have to pay a subscription and it's partially excludable as a result. That's a little hybrid system, but generally speaking, regular AM, FM radio, it's kind of a public good. Similarly, you have parks that may have free entry, but there may be fees for parking or amenities like if you want to rent a picnic area. That's more of that mixed model. The basic good, which is access to a green space, is largely non-excludable and non-rivalrous. But if you want exclusive access to certain functions or features of the park, then the fees come in. So beyond public goods, there's another category of goods that we need to consider as well, which are common resources. These are goods that are like public goods because they're non-excludable, meaning that they're difficult to prevent people from using. But unlike public goods, they are rivalrous, meaning that one person's use of the resource does reduce its availability for others. The classic problem here is what we call the tragedy of the commons. Because the resource is non-excludable, everyone has an incentive to use it. But because it's rivalrous, overuse can lead to its depletion or its degradation, harming everybody in the long run. A prime example of is the overharvesting of queen conch in the Caribbean. To address this is discussed in your text. The government often intervenes by imposing things like licensing requirements or harvesting limits, shorter seasons, and even like you catch it, you share it, and kind of system, like a catch sharing system, to try to manage this resource more sustainably to prevent its depletion. Just like here in the state of West Virginia, if you want to go fishing, you got to get a fishing license. And there are rules about the size of the fish that you're allowed to take back home with you. Same with a hunting license. There are lots of rules about that, and there's fees if you violate those rules. You may even go to have a criminal record if you really violate some of those rules. So while it might be easy to classify something like pizza as a private good and a city park as a public good, common resources like fisheries and waterways, they fall into this distinct category of non-excludable but still rival goods. So just to wrap up this chapter, I want to kind of bring everything together, and a good way to do that is to look at public health programs. Right? Advances in public health have been closely linked to both positive externalities and public goods. We have improvements in areas like public sanitation systems, providing clean water and disposing of waste, that are essentially public goods. They're largely non-excludable and they're non-rivalrous. And they generate significant positive externalities by preventing the spread of disease through the entire population. Similarly, medical discoveries that result from government or university-funded research, like immunizations, antibiotics, and high blood pressure reducers, those have strong public good characteristics. Once a vaccine is developed, for example, its widespread use not only protects the individuals who are vaccinated, but also creates this herd immunity, benefiting those who are unable to be vaccinated, like children, newborns, pregnant mothers, things like that. And then finally, changes in public behavior, which can be promoted through government health campaigns, like encouraging hand washing and food storage and protection, reducing tobacco use, and taking precautions against STDs, that generates these positive externalities for the entire community because you're reducing the overall burden of illness. So despite these successes in the public health space, there's always going to be a challenge here because addressing the unequal access to health-related technology continues to be a challenge. Healthcare continues to be more and more expensive. So in our next couple of chapters, what we're going to be talking about is that's the last of this chapter. In our next couple of chapters, we're going to return to the labor market. I think it's been since chapter 3 where we really talked much about the labor market. We're going to return to the labor market. We're going to look at income. And in the final chapter, we're going to look at income inequality and the poverty trap. And so that's a good segue because when we talk about rising health insurance, rising healthcare costs, and the inequality of access to healthcare technologies, which we definitely saw during the pandemic, I think it's a good place to end this class is on talking about, the purpose of studying economics is not so you can pad your pockets and make more money and be a successful business person. The purpose of studying economics and being attuned with the economy is so that we can create the most fair, the most innovative, the most, where we can create a society where the cost of living is low enough, or rather, the standard of living. The standard of living is higher. That's our goal. I kind of fumbled my words around a little bit, but the purpose of studying economics is so that we as a society can create higher and higher and higher standards of living. I want my kid, I want my 2-year-old to have a better life than I did. Economically, I want him to have more money. I want him to have more fun. I want him to enjoy himself. I want him to have a nice home, a nice car, nice things, but I want him to be happy. And I want him to be healthy. I want him to be able to walk into a hospital, and if he needs care, he can get the care, and it not cost him, 3 or 4 years of his working life to pay for that care. We want a better society for our future, for our kids. That's why we study economics. It's not so we can pat our own pockets or be better in business. It's so that we can continue to create a society that has higher and higher and higher standards of living. And the fact of the matter is, when you look across the widespread poverty, especially here in our state of West Virginia and Eastern Kentucky and places like that, and Appalachia at large, when you look at the widespread poverty, when you look at the richest 1% of America who buy private yachts and $10,000 bottles of champagne, it's unconscionable that we have created an economic system that allows these two things to be compatible with one another, that allows both to exist at the same time. And so for me, at least personally, when I think about why the economy is important to study, it's because that shouldn't exist. We should have a society where everyone's standards of living are improved, where poverty is not a problem, where everybody's better off. And some would say we are all better off, Josh. Think about how we lived 50 years ago, 100 years ago. We didn't have refrigerators. We didn't have microwaves. We didn't have all these things. And that's all valid and true. But at the same time, look at the widespread wealth inequality. Look at how some people live and some people, you could hardly call it living. I live in West Virginia. I've seen it time and time again. Right? The inequality is massive right now. And so that's going to be where we end this class, is on discussing, again, the labor market, income levels, poverty, and income inequality. It's going to take the next couple of chapters to get through that material. And I apologize in advance if I get on my soapbox a little bit, but I think it's an important thing. I think it's the reason to study the economy is because we want to create a better society for our future, and a better society means a better society for all people, in my opinion. So anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox. I appreciate you all. I will see you all next time.